Hello and welcome to day 2 at the Great Apes Summit here in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. This morning's session kicked off by looking at the illegal trade in great apes. I spoke to Naftali Honig, who lives in Congo, and he runs the Enforcement Wildlife Project, PALF. He told me that the lenient sentencing for traffickers means that the demand for apes remains high and that they fetch an enormous price on the black market. So Naftali, why did you get involved with PALF and how did it come about?
So basically, there is this model of wildlife law enforcement in Cameroon called LAGA, and LAGA just got ready. Basically, they had gotten their activities so solid in Cameroon that they were ready to replicate into the rest of Central Africa, and the first country that they replicated into was Congo, and they needed a coordinator, and I fit the description, so I came in and started learning a lot about, there's so many different aspects on the ground of fighting corruption, but that's basically what LAGA's model had established, and so I went and I did that in Congo.
Some could say you are vigilantes of the forest because wildlife enforcement is very difficult, particularly in African countries where there is so much corruption. Would you say that's a fair description?
I would say that we're activists and we're trying to spread activism in Central and West Africa for fighting corruption. I mean, you know, there's no... We're rooting for the police. We're rooting for the good guys, basically, and we are just trying to make that happen, despite all the corruption that exists in that area.
It's a very dangerous job what you do, and gathering the information, a lot of undercover work. What's the kind of things that you've seen that have really remained with you?
I mean, a lot of probably the toughest thing is seeing government involvement and seeing that, you know, I mean, if you have a big dealer in front of you, that's one thing. But when you see that maybe he's working in complicity with, you know, government officials. I mean, in Congo, for instance, the law is very clear. If you're a government official involved in illegal wildlife trade, you get the maximum sentence. And unfortunately, that's not what happens. So they seem to get off and find their way, you know, free, whereas, you know, maybe the small poacher is the guy getting punished. And we really want to shift away from that paradigm and talk more about the corrupt officials and the kingpins and try and get those guys behind bars.
There never seems to be enough organisation. So even when people are arrested, there are never enough records of who has been arrested and what they've been fined. And these people become repeat offenders and we don't seem to be making any progress.
Well, I mean, a lot of the countries in Western and Central Africa don't have like electronic record keeping for some things like that. You know, there was a guy that we know because we have in our records that he was arrested in 2011 for trafficking ivory and trafficking munitions, illegal munitions as well. And now he's been arrested again in 2013, and we're just now uncovering that he may have also been arrested in 2006. So yeah, I mean, you know, and that's because of a search of his house, which found some documents and stuff. So, I mean, yeah, the record keeping has a long way to go. We try and keep records of what we're involved in, the cases that we're fighting, but we want to improve that and work on that as well.
PALF was established in 2008. You've now set up a new network, Eagle Network. Which countries have you got involved, and what are you hoping to achieve there?
So Eagle Network is the network which encompasses that LAGA model, that original model from Cameroon, but it's now spread into 6 countries. So we're working in Cameroon, Congo, Central African Republic, Gabon, Togo, and Guinea. Obviously, work in CAR has been a bit difficult recently because of the coup d'etat that was there, but it's been impossible. But we're you know, hoping that the best happens with you know, Central African Republic and that we can get back to reinforcing wildlife laws there.
How important is it to have local people involved? So sometimes you see NGOs come in and they bring in a whole bunch of Westerners. How important is it to have local people on the ground who speak the language, who know the country, who understand the culture, who can tap into that underground network?
It's totally important. We would rather see ourselves replaced entirely. I mean, one of the main reasons why it's good to have expatriate coordinators is because we are less likely to have our families threatened on the ground or kind of feel the pressures that maybe a local might be subject to. But we have as much local involvement as possible. That's why in Eagle is eco-activism for governance and law enforcement. That activism component is essential to us. It's not just that we are activists, it's that we're trying to breed activism in Central Africa, a place where historically there hasn't been a lot of political activism or just kind of NGO, civil society participation, and that's what we want. It's a big kind of cultural change that we would like to leave behind.
And with regards to government, you're spanning quite a number of different countries. How has the attitude of governments been?
So I think that governments are more and more willing, now that we've got this corruption issue on the table, they're more and more willing to acknowledge that it exists. It's the first, step, is admitting that there's a problem and realizing that to do that, you need kind of a special type of partnership where you have a civil society entity working with government entities in order to get those laws applied. I mean, we all understand. It's the evidence is there that corruption blocks the rule of law, and so once a government is ready to admit that, then we're ready to address it.
PALF and the other activists involved have achieved a lot in the last few years. Where do you see wildlife corruption in 5 years' time? Do you think we can ever get a handle on it?
The more we get into it, the more we see how big wildlife trade is, and we see the corruption on all levels. We're not talking about just the little, envelopes slipped under the table, in some remote corner of a Central African country, but all the way to the top, and not just in Africa, in countries across the world, in the developing world, but also in the developed world. And so, we have an enormous task ahead of us, and we just want people to recognize the importance of deterring people by applying those wildlife laws. So, it started in Cameroon, that's not enough. Central Africa, that's not enough. West Africa, even all of Africa, that's not enough. We want to keep making bridges. Asia, South America, Europe, North America, we want to address it wherever it exists.